On the cold morning of December 6th, 1983, a Niagara Mohawk power truck driver made a shocking find along Route 17 in the town of Ellery in Chautauqua County, New York. In a drainage ditch near the highway lay the body of a woman, face up and partially clothed, with no purse, shoes, jewelry, or any form of identification. Authorities determined the victim was a white female around 30 to 37 years old, approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall and 125 pounds, with brown eyes. She had been beaten and also shot 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the back, and once in the face. The injuries, including damage to her skull from the beating, suggested a very personal and violent attack. With no name to call her, investigators labeled the unknown victim the Chautauqua County Jane Doe, and the search for her identity and the perpetrator began. From the outset, law enforcement officials struggled to identify the woman. No local missing person reports matched her description. An examination by a forensic anthropologist in Buffalo uncovered intriguing clues that hinted the victim may not have been from the area. The woman's clothing included high-quality, expensive pieces from Europe. For instance, a plaid wool trench coat and a white V-neck shirt were both Italian or German produced, and not sold in the States. She also wore a handmade skirt which likely also came from Europe. Her dental work was similarly telling. She had gold fillings indicating expensive European-style dental care. Perhaps most striking, the victim was found to have an IUD for birth control that was foreign-made and, at the time, available only in Canada and parts of Europe. These findings strongly suggested that the woman had ties outside the country, possibly in Western Europe or Canada. Investigators also noted evidence that strongly suggested she had given birth about 15 years prior. One physical clue puzzled investigators more than any other: a single handwritten note found in the victim's coat pocket. The note was on stationery from the Blue Bay Motor Hotel, a motel in Vancouver, British Columbia, on Canada's west coast. On it were 3 lines of letters and 5-digit numbers, scrawled in a barely legible form. The letters appeared to be abbreviations or shorthand, and the numbers were written as 24233, 68301, and 74261. At the time, police hoped this cryptic note meant the woman had stayed at the motel, which could lead to a guest registry and a real name. They obtained motel receipts from October through December 1983 to check for anyone resembling Jane Doe. However, given the vast distance between Vancouver, Canada and Chautauqua County, New York, any stay could have been weeks or months before the slaying, and no clear link was found. To this day, the exact meaning of the motel note remains unclear. It may reference airline phone numbers, map coordinates, or something else entirely. Still, its presence provided strong circumstantial evidence, which indicated a connection between the victim or perpetrator and a journey that involved Western Canada. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, the case remained stubbornly cold, despite numerous efforts. Investigators enlisted the help of the FBI and even Interpol to run the victim's fingerprints, but no identification was made. Details of the case were published in a variety of trade magazines for detectives in the US, Canada, Italy, and a few other European countries, in hopes of generating leads. The few leads that did emerge led to dead ends. One theory considered early on was that Jane Doe might have been traveling with a long-haul truck driver. One witness reported seeing a woman of her description at a nearby truck stop the day before the slaying. On this basis, investigators thought she could have been hitchhiking or riding eastward with someone. However, nothing concrete ever tied a specific person or vehicle to the crime. Over the years, a few individuals came forward with claims or tips, but none panned out. In one instance, an inmate in Oklahoma, already serving a life sentence for other violent crimes, confessed to slaying the woman, providing details that initially seemed credible. Detectives traveled to interview him, only to determine he was a fraud who had learned about the case from a magazine and was seeking attention. In another case, a woman in California contacted police, claiming the victim was her missing friend from Toronto, the largest city in Canada. An investigator even went to Toronto to follow up, but no evidence was found to substantiate the claim. Despite theories that the victim might have been involved in some criminal activity, no evidence ever indicated this, and nothing explained why she was in Chautauqua County. Then the leads simply stopped, and the case went cold for almost 4 decades, with virtually no developments whatsoever. One tip in early 2021 pointed to a missing woman from Montreal, Canada, named Erzabeth Zita, who had vanished in October 1981. Zita's age and timeline seemed to align with Jane Doe, especially since she was from outside the U.S. In response, investigators coordinated with Montreal police and obtained DNA from Zita's daughter for comparison. Hopes were dashed when the DNA test came back negative. Investigators then turned to cutting-edge forensic techniques to develop new leads. By 2021, the FBI agreed to assist by using forensic genetic genealogy. Jane Doe's DNA was submitted to specialized genealogy labs to find potential familial matches. The genetic markers indicated the woman likely had roots in the Netherlands, Belgium, or Western Germany. This finding affirmed what investigators had long suspected from the physical evidence, that this Jane Doe was probably European. Armed with that knowledge, the team began reaching out to law enforcement and media in those countries, hoping to find a missing person report or family that might match the victim. At the same time, authorities revisited the physical evidence with fresh eyes. A new forensic artist's sketch was produced in 2022, incorporating new details and producing a more lifelike sketch. This updated illustration presented her as a petite woman with wavy brown hair and dark eyes, distinct from older, less accurate sketches. Investigators also re-examined the note from the motel. They now believe the scribbled information could reference airline flights, or perhaps be a coded reference to Canadian phone numbers. That said this evidence is still very much open for interpretation, so if you have a credible theory on it, reach out directly to the authorities. If someone could figure out exactly what this reference is, it would be a major breakthrough in the case. In 2023, a further boost came from an independent source. A missing persons awareness organization created lifelike digital images of this Jane Doe, using her post-mortem photographs as a base to show what she might have looked like alive. And yes, if you're just listening, this is one of those times you'll want to look at your screen for a moment. At present, the case appears to be making headway for the first time in decades, and I suspect that familial DNA will be able to at least solve the mystery of this woman's identity. Once her identity is solved and returned to her, this may cause a torrent of clues to come forth regarding how she actually perished. It also may give some context to the coded messages on the notepad, which may help the authorities figure out what precisely the writings mean. As always with these sorts of cases, I hope to have an update on the Chautauqua County Jane Doe in a future episode. On November 15, 2015, 82-year-old Tom Messick went missing during a deer hunting trip in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. Messick was part of a hunting party of 7 friends and family members, an outing they did annually for decades. That year, the group chose to hunt near Lily Pond by Brant Lake in the town of Horicon, a spot they hadn't visited before. Due to his age and health, Messick's role was to remain stationary as a watch. He was sitting on a stump near a logging road while younger members of the party walked through the woods to drive deer toward him. They planned to regroup around 2 p.m., but when the others returned to the meeting spot, Messick was nowhere to be found. Messick did have some health limitations. He'd lost one eye in an accident and had poor hearing and heart troubles, but he was a lifelong outdoorsman. He carried a hunting rifle and walkie-talkie that day, and he wore camouflage clothing along with his distinctive red and black plaid hat. When Messick failed to show up at the rendezvous point, his companions searched the area and then contacted authorities that afternoon. Forest rangers arrived by 4:30 p.m. and scoured the woods until midnight, but they found no trace of the missing hunter. In essence, what had been a routine outing had suddenly turned into a baffling wilderness mystery that persists to this day. In the days and weeks that followed, a massive search and rescue operation was launched around Lily Pond to look for any sign of Tom Messick. It became one of the most intensive searches the Adirondacks had seen in years, covering roughly 29 square miles of difficult terrain in northern Warren County. At its peak, more than 300 people were involved in the effort, and search teams utilized a wide range of resources. Specially trained search dogs were deployed to track any scent or clues in the woods. Further, state police helicopters conducted aerial sweeps of the forest, and teams of divers searched Lily Pond and other nearby waterways. Despite the exhaustive search, not a single piece of evidence was discovered. The operation continued for weeks, ultimately lasting around 2 months in some form. Yet it turned up no sign of Messick or any of his belongings. Searchers found no footprints, no clothing, and no other clues to indicate what happened. Rescuers were left baffled by how an elderly man could vanish so completely without a trace. With no leads from the search, the New York State Police took charge of the investigation. Messick's disappearance was classified as an active missing person case, and the State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation pursued any possible leads. Investigators have kept the case open. As one state police investigator noted in a 2023 interview, quote, "Missing persons cases aren't closed until we figure out what happened." The unusual circumstances also drew attention from federal authorities. According to Messick's wife, FBI agents told her that something isn't right about Tom's case, although they didn't share any specific theories. Without evidence, the FBI had no explanation either, highlighting how baffling the situation was even to seasoned investigators. As time went on with no answers, numerous theories and speculation emerged about what might have happened to Tom. One possibility was that Messick succumbed to a medical emergency, such as a heart attack, or became lost and died somewhere completely hidden from view. He might have wandered just far enough off his post that searchers missed him, or perhaps fell into a natural crevice or an abandoned mine shaft that concealed him. Another theory suggests that perhaps Tom encountered an unknown person in the woods, or was the victim of an accidental shooting or collision that was then covered up. His wife speculated that an ATV rider might have hit him, and panicking, carried him out of the area. However, law enforcement found no hint of any crime or mishap during their investigation, so this theory remains unsupported by evidence. Personally, despite the lack of any corroborating evidence, I think this is the most sensible theory to explain how he dropped off the face of the earth, despite a massive investigation. After all, Tom Messick wasn't exactly in the best physical shape, and can't have wandered too far from where he was posted. Perhaps a hunting party accidentally struck him with an ATV or accidentally shot him, and then made efforts to cover up the act. If the cover-up was thorough enough, the fact that the entire scene wasn't closed off immediately and treated as a location where foul play may have occurred may have allowed evidence to spoil. And that's not a knock at the investigators here. They immediately sprung into action and began searching for Tom, clearly believing this was a somewhat standard missing person case. The baffling lack of evidence also fueled more unusual ideas, and Tom Messick's case has become a cornerstone of missing 411 videos on YouTube. These videos generally hypothesize that something otherworldly may have been at play in Tom's disappearance. As evidence for this, One hunting partner reported hearing a strange, unidentifiable noise in the woods around the time Messick vanished. Notably, online investigators have also noted that the FBI informed Tom's wife that something seemed very off about the case. The inference they take from this statement is different from what his wife took out of it. While his wife assumed this referred to foul play, these online investigators took the statement to suggest the possibility of an extraterrestrial encounter. While some have criticized these amateur sleuths' intense focus on an unproven theory, I think it's very important to note that these theories have kept attention on Tom's case. While I personally don't believe we need to resort to any supernatural explanations here, the fact that millions of people have become aware of Tom Messick because of it is a very good thing. As I've said before throughout this series, the best way to keep the authorities investigating a case is to keep as much attention on the case as possible. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Now let's get back to business. Hyperborea was a legendary land in Greek mythology, imagined to lie far to the north beyond the reach of the cold north wind, or Boreas. In ancient tales, it was depicted as an idyllic realm of eternal spring, abundant harvests, and perpetual sunshine. Hyperborea was said to be inhabited by a blessed people called the Hyperboreans, who worshipped the god Apollo. The Greeks believed this land was so remote that only heroes or favored mortals could reach it, making Hyperborea a symbol of an unreachable northern paradise in their literature. One of the earliest references to Hyperborea appears in a fragment of Hesiod's Catalogue of Women from the 8th century BC. By the 5th century BC, the poet Pindar provided a vivid description of this land. In his Pythian odes, Pindar wrote that Apollo spends the winter among the Hyperboreans, and he portrayed their country as a utopia. He described it as a place where people never get sick or old, and never have to engage in heavy labor or fight. In another ode, Pindar describes the hero Heracles traveling to Hyperborea, chasing a doe, a deer, a female deer, beyond the Danube. The historian Herodotus, who lived in the 5th century BC, provided the earliest surviving prose account of the Hyperboreans. Herodotus reported that the Hyperboreans lived beyond the nomadic tribes of the far north. He recounted a tradition that offerings from the Hyperboreans were passed from one northern tribe to the next, until they eventually reached the Greek temple of Apollo on Delos. Despite recording these legends, Herodotus expressed skepticism about the literal existence of Hyperborea. He noted the uncertainty of such tales, and wryly concluded that if there really are Hyperboreans, that there must be an equally fantastical people living far to the south in the extreme heat. Herodotus, in essence, thus treated Hyperborea as a curious hearsay from earlier poets of bygone days, one that he was willing to document but not fully endorse as factual. And this is, of course, one of the reasons why Herodotus has been widely accepted as the father of historical inquiry. In the late 4th century BC, the Greek writer Hecataeus of Abdera compiled a comprehensive work on the Hyperboreans, synthesizing the various legends circulating by that time. Although Hecataeus's treatise on the Hyperboreans is lost, portions survive through later authors like Diodorus Siculus. According to Diodorus, writing in the 1st century BC, Hecataeus described Hyperborea as a real island in the regions beyond the land of the Celts, in the broad ocean to the far north. This island was said to be no smaller than Sicily, extremely fertile with a mild climate that yielded 2 harvests per year. Hecataeus linked Hyperborea closely with Apollo's worship. He wrote that the god's mother Leto was born on this island, and that the Hyperboreans honored Apollo above all other gods. The island supposedly housed a magnificent circular temple of Apollo, adorned with many offerings, and its inhabitants, acting as the god's priests, continuously sang and played lyres. Some scholars believe this description was an early attempt to identify Hyperborea with a specific place. For instance, the large island beyond Gaul could correspond to Britain, especially given the references to a circular temple which later writers even compared to Stonehenge. The British Isles are extremely fertile, and the climate is mild, especially relative to where it is geographically. Whether or not Hecataeus literally meant Britain, his portrayal treated Hyperborea as a tangible northern land, blending myth with geographic speculation. Writers of the Roman era continued to refer to Hyperborea, often echoing earlier Greek notions. Roman poets and scholars used Hyperborean as a byword for the extreme north, or an idealized faraway people. For example, the poet Virgil and the statesman Cicero both alluded to the Hyperboreans when speaking of an exceedingly remote, blissful place. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, from the 1st century AD, mentions the Hyperboreans as a people living far to the north, allegedly reaching ages of up to 1,000 years. As knowledge of the world expanded, later writers tried to reconcile the Hyperborea legend with real geography. In the 2nd century AD, writers attempted to tie the Ural Mountains in what is now Russia to the legend, and various steppe peoples, such as the Scythians, were roped into the legend. Modern scholarship generally views Hyperborea as a blend of myth and limited ancient knowledge of northern lands. Historians note that Greek contact with peoples north of the Black Sea and along the Danube in the early Iron Age may have inspired elements of the Hyperborean legend. Amber trade routes from the Baltic and reports of strange lands of midnight sun likely filtered down to the Mediterranean, seeding the idea of a far-off land where the sun barely sets. The legend that the sun rose and set only once a year in Hyperborea has invited comparisons to the Arctic Circle, where polar day and night each last 6 months. Mainstream historians tend to conclude that Hyperborea was not a specific place, but rather a symbolic composite. It was a reflection of Greek encounters with distant tribes, combined with imagination about lands of perpetual light and plenty beyond the north wind. That said, personally, I'm partial to the theory that it may have described the British Isles, even if this theory isn't widely accepted.